Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this concluding panel of the conference. I'm really pleased to have a number of very eminent people with us on the panel today. And rather than me introduce them, I think it'd be quite good if they introduce themselves. So do you want to start from left to right?
Sure. I'm Tracy Armstrong. It's a pleasure to see you all, and I am the CEO of Copyright Clearance Center.
Hi, Annie Callanan, the lady with the 322 slides from this morning, CEO of Taylor & Francis.
And just so you know, Annie created all those slides herself. That's just...
and they're all laughing.
Yeah,
They don't believe
they don't believe you. It's true. Judy Versus, and I am the EVP of Research for Wiley, and I am a bit disappointed that Michael didn't introduce me because I would have loved to hear what he had to say. Yeah.
Daniel Ebneter, CEO of Karger Publishers, the guy with the 4 slides this morning.
Darrell's pointed out to me that we should send our best wishes to Anka Beck, who was originally meant to be part of this panel, but unfortunately had to go in and have surgery, and so couldn't be with us today. And to thank Daniel for stepping in at very much the last moment. So if we can give her a round of applause in her absence. Now, the title of this panel is Innovation in the Executive Suite. And we gathered some input from the audience, and we've analysed it and looked at it, and I'm going to ask our panellists to give you their thoughts on a number of the different issues here. And so the very first question would be, what does innovation mean to you in your organisation?
You want me to start?
Whoever wishes to go
I'm in
first.
first position, so this time I'll start, and then we can mix it up. Well, just to get the conversation started, I guess I would say that the way we look at innovation, it is not limited to any one area of the business. So it is, typically, of course, we think about delighting the customer. So what are we doing in product development, But there is so much that we're doing in terms of operational innovation and how we're updating our processes and procedures. I also think that, and certainly we are heavily investing in innovation with regard to data. So there's product, there's the services, the service component, and how we're investing in those areas, but also in the workflows inside our company. So I think that's a very important point. And one theme that has permeated the day is the enormous investment that everybody, I think, in this room is making in terms of innovation in the area of data. So there's some opening remarks.
Do we want to be linear? Okay.
For now.
For now. Gosh. I think a few things come to mind, top of mind, in terms of innovation, lifelong lessons that you learn as you go, because I think there's a tendency to think about these things in kind of larger than life terms early on. And now I try to be more pragmatic about it and think about it in terms of solving real problems that we can sort of specify. So less innovative and more pragmatic. But I think one real standout thought is not letting perfection be the enemy of the good, because I think we all have this tendency to keep trying to figure it out, and then nothing happens. And so just tossing, I think we live in an environment now where we can get things out much more quickly, rapidly prototype, rapidly assimilate the experience of the customer and sort of iterate. And that ends up being quite innovative when you think about kind of the old waterfall linear progression of how things used to get developed. So that's something that, that we try to focus on. And then I think the other thing is really, I don't know how innovative this really is, but it's really about value. And I think that's becoming a harder and harder bar to aspire to.
That was really good, Annie. All right. So from my perspective, when I think about innovation, and I always draw inspiration externally, and of course the one that probably comes to everyone is you think of Steve Jobs, who had this great idea, crazy idea. How do you have 1,000 songs in your pocket, or if you're a woman, in your pocketbook? And that wasn't something that anyone was really looking for at that time, but it was new and different, addressing unmet needs, solving different challenges. as a way to create value not only for the customer, but for the company. So whenever I think about innovation, I always go back to that, go back to Steve Jobs and say, that's what it really needs to be all about. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to learn from outside experiences. And to me, it's real fascinating, Tracy. I'm happy you brought it up. When you think of innovation, lots of times it's all about technology and product. No, it's not just about technology and product. It can be about workflows and internal processes. It can be about creative business models or pricing or packaging or customer experience. And so I think we've got to make sure we let our minds go there and keep that customer, whoever that customer is, it could be internal customer, but keep that customer front and center and their unmet needs. And then that's when I think the magic starts to happen.
Excellent point on the business models.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what the word innovation means is doing new things, or at least doing things in a new way, and I think that's pretty simple, but still hard, as we heard this morning. So, and the challenge really with innovation is to innovate at a pace superior to the ecosystem you're in, else you will be in big trouble. So again, quite simple. And I very much liked in the panel this morning this approach of the different types of innovation, and really when it comes to being good at innovation, it's about setting clear goals and choosing the right mix and the right people for the different types of innovation. I think that's the path to go
Just to add a little thought there, I think one thing it's important is being willing to take risks and thinking about the business model piece. I think we have to be willing to let some things go in order to innovate. Because if we try to keep everything we have now and add to it, and exclusively add to it, rather than, being willing to move pieces around, that you just spread everything too thin. It's kind of a have your cake and eat it too type scenario. So I think for us to, each one of our organizations very different, but for us to really be innovating within our own organization, inside our organization, of course, listening to our customers outside of our companies, but being willing to eat our own lunch, being willing to partner in a way that, is unprecedented with your customer, with another, company in the space. I think that's those are the biggest risks we can take, is how do we really work together in a completely new way? And that's extremely innovative. So innovation even in relationships, and how, what we're willing to share and how we're willing to share it. I think that's, that's pretty scary. But it's pretty bold. And, and if we look at lessons from other industries, if we don't take steps like that in our own industry, and I think Steve Jobs is a great lesson, then it's the new entrant that comes in that takes care of it for you, if you aren't willing to do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And we have, Harvard case after Harvard case after Harvard case to reinforce this, industry after industry after industry that has not been able to do it. And, incumbents, very difficult. I mean, almost impossible. So, as the MBA teaches us, so, it's really important to do that. And so in that way, then I would say it's so important in your organization as a leader to foster an environment where risk is rewarded, even if there's failure. I certainly have a lot of work to do myself on this. We try very hard in our organization to do that, but you need to, I would say all leaders should really be thinking about that. How can you foster that kind of an environment where people feel safe bringing up an idea, feel safe collaborating with somebody that might feel like, a competitor, that kind of thing. So those are some additional thoughts.
Yeah, and I think being willing to take more risks, identified as risks, is just the first step, because the second step should be to completely reassess what actually represents a risk to your company. You mentioned the example of strategic partnerships, and we have changed or need to change our attitude towards strategic partnerships and maybe rethink what is actually a risk and what is not a risk in the classical sense of the meaning.
Yep, great point, Daniel.
So you've all described different approaches to how you do this. Do you think there are any ground rules for best practice or worst practice within this?
One of the things I've noted in my experiences, I don't know if other panelists share this, one thing that is hard to do is to innovate sometimes when you actually don't know what problem you're trying to solve. And I've seen many examples where colleagues and I have gotten caught up in chasing these opportunities and these solutions because they appear to be innovative. And we think they make a lot of sense, but then, you sort of lose sight. We get so enamored with what we're doing, and it's, this gadget and this buzzword and this, kind of prototype, and it all sounds really good. But if you can't get back down to the fundamental of, okay, whose life is changing and how, what's the real problem, sometimes you get too caught up and too vested in sort of funding this baby that you've given birth to, and no one's sitting there telling you it's an ugly baby, so you just keep putting money into it, and it's not actually anything that anybody really needs. Bad analogy, but you know what I mean.
And you hold it and you measure, and a lot of times you measure those new things on the same scale as your existing kind of cash cow businesses. So you're sort of you're looking for the replacement that ship's not going to sail. You need to measure the newer, smaller initiatives on a different S-curve, really. And that is a huge challenge from a management perspective, and helping everybody in the organization feel like whether you're working on things that are more legacy business or these new shiny objects, that everybody's contributing to the common good, and that there's reward. The biggest thing that you need your team to have is intrinsic rewards. Of course, you can provide monetary rewards, but that's the biggest thing that brings you to work every day: are the quality of the people you work with and the quality of the work you work on. So that is essential. So people need to feel intellectually and emotionally engaged in the work they do. Those are the types of intrinsic rewards that we as leaders need to help to create fertile ground to foster, but we are not, as leaders, creating that. It's the team and your client base that's creating it. You need to create the environment where it can happen. That's what you're doing as the leader. So it's, this is not a mandate or a top-down approach. I think that's really critically important, or you really don't break through to that innovation. I think I'm talking too much.
I'm going to stay in the ugly baby track because you love your babies no matter what. Michael, and I'm going to ask a question rather than answering your question, because it's interesting that you ask us the question about what we're doing from an innovation perspective that we can share, great lessons learned. So, fellow panelists, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate our industry, both publishing and the partners around it, as innovative? 10 being the best.
Should we go in order of size of company? Then I think,
no,
Judy, do you go first?
Throw out a number. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
It's definitely less than 5.
Yeah. Always let the client answer that question.
Yeah.
I remember being on a panel at this meeting a few years ago. Okay, so how are we doing in innovating on diversity? Well, look around the room. I think there's the answer to that one. And then I've been on some panels about that here. And I was on a panel one year here. No, I don't think I was on this panel. I think I was listening to it. And we were talking about innovation. No, I think I was on it. And somebody cited, and I am a big fan, somebody cited Crossref as an innovation. That was a long time ago. And also Copyright Clearance Center sometimes gets cited as an innovation in our industry, and we opened in 1978. So, some things to think about.
Nobody's giving me a number. Yeah. I want numbers.
Yeah.
Just
well, I'm just saying. I'm saying I agree with you. I think it's probably it's middling, but it's not declining. It's improving. I think we are, as an industry, innovating more because we have to, right? So it's really, the space. The interesting thing is, if we looked at it on a 2x2 or some trajectory, what's the horizon look like, right? What we all know is that change is coming, but nobody knows exactly when. So there's all of this, speculation about when. So how much has the horizon kind of shrunk, and how much more time do we have to innovate in a way that's going to really seriously change the outcomes, so that, for example, market-based solutions, market-based multilateral solutions come from inside, for example, this room. I think that is the $10 million question.
I want to unpack Judy's question just slightly, because I think asking it overall is a difficult one to answer, but innovation happens in particular areas. So if you actually had to split up the industry into different areas, even within your own companies, you'd probably say that there are some areas that we're innovating quite fast because they have to, and there are other areas where it's not quite such a need and they don't, and that actually the average might look too good, but in some areas where it needs to happen, perhaps it is happening quite fast. But it's your opinions I'm interested in.
What I wanted to share on this, because it is a great question, and the initial instinct is to say, okay, it's a low number. But in fairness to all of us, and I spent, just before this gig, I was out in Milpitas, Silicon Valley, right, where you would consider sort of the things, I was embarrassed by my company that was growing 30% a year, because that wasn't a big enough number, so things are different out there. But the environment out there is really, you start with nothing. So you're trying to disrupt the rest of the world, right? So the business model, the inherent kind of mindset that you start out with is that you have nothing, and in order to get a value proposition, you have to destroy a value proposition that already exists that's sort of obsolescing, right? So you're hardwired to think of innovation. I think our challenge here that I've observed in the 2 years that I've been in our community is that we actually have a tremendous amount to lose. And so the mindset, I think, has been to try and preserve what we find really good and valuable. And I think the challenge that we should allow ourselves, in terms of risk-taking, to embrace is there is still a tremendous amount of value to preserve. And I don't mean that in profits, but I really mean that in kind of the things that I spoke about this morning. So there is a lot to preserve, and we shouldn't be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So I think what we have the responsibility to do is to figure out kind of the balance of preserving what's really still valuable and sustainable, while at the same time taking some very innovative steps using modern tools and technologies to get at these unsolved problems that still have yet to be solved. And even on the basis of the discussion that's gone on in this panel, I'd love to go off with Judy and figure out how we can bring our corpuses together to solve problems. Now, I don't think anyone has ever really thought of kind of that type of innovation, where we're thinking differently about partnerships, where we're thinking differently about solutions. And if we can open ourselves up to that kind of innovation, it doesn't have to be even groundbreaking, sort of Steve Jobs-like, although let's aspire, but it may be really more straightforward, kind of near-term opportunities that create a lot of value, even though they're not sort of going to make global headlines, but they'll really matter to our communities. And so, we should cut ourselves some slack because we don't have that, because we're not in the same kind of environment, but I think there's more we can do.
I think it's worthwhile looking at this idea of rating how innovative the industry is, and to two perspectives. So one would be how much we see the need for information, for innovation, how much we embrace innovation, what kind of activities we develop to make our organizations more innovative. And I think I would give many companies a high mark on that. But the other thing is the measure of the outcome of the innovation activities that we developed. And this will take some time, right? So because the starting point is a very traditional business that hasn't changed a lot in 250 years. So we need to accelerate that, but it's not just done like this.
Yeah, no, the reason I asked that question is, I was thinking about this industry and just over the past decade in terms of what were the really more groundbreaking innovations that have come out. And I struggled with that. I mean, there's some stuff, and then I contrast that in coming from outside the industry. Here, this industry, the people in it are the most brilliant people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So I think there hasn't been an impetus or a catalyst to really take those scary steps and drive towards innovation. And we are going to have to, because when you think about everything that's going on in our market and our big fears, it's all caused by unmet customer needs that has led to all this disruption. So, and the other reason why, Michael, I was pushing on that, because you're asking us here, and again, not known for great innovations, there's innovations, but not great. So I would love to see a panel of really innovative companies and lessons learned, best practices learned that we all can leverage. I mean, so that was my thought process.
Yeah,
Well, I
great.
think the world's challenges, I was at a meeting last week where somebody related it to climate change. So, if we think about the challenges that the community is facing, the world is facing, and from a scientific perspective, is the scholarly communications environment fit for purpose to address these challenges that are out there today? Mm-hmm. And they're epic, so that unprecedented, and so we can't go on without addressing them. And so for our community, in terms of measuring outcomes, the outcomes way beyond business outcomes, again, looking at the common good from a global perspective, we have to figure out how the scholarly communications community is contributing to that in the context of the challenges that we're facing today. And that is a very, very big mandate. And one of the things that, this organization, STM, this is a convening organization, and or other organizations like this need to convene. Both members, but certainly people outside the community, to foster dialogue, because that's the only way we're going to move forward to meaningful solutions. So I think, and we see in the business models and some of the big deals that have been done that are groundbreaking right on this panel, that everybody's, looking at, studying, examining, and to some degree copying. That's all good stuff, but it's going to take a lot more of that and a lot faster, trajectory.
I'm interested, given what you were saying about the fact that there's legacy issues that inevitably large and medium-sized companies have to deal with. Does that mean that you think that actually the most radical innovation is always going to be in a startup? And if that's the case, how do you factor that into your particular way of operating as companies?
I think you got to, in my mind, Michael, there's a couple things. Obviously, startups are great, and I think there's opportunity to help enable more startups to creep up in our industry. But the other thing that we need to do, and again, as you go around in the room and you talk to each other on backgrounds, I mean, most people have been in this industry the bulk of their career. And I think what's going to help drive innovation is different thinking coming from the outside in to help kind of take what's great with, the established strengths that we have, bring in different thinking so you're not continue to drink the same Kool-Aid and expect a different, outcome there. To me, those ingredients are going to make a big, big difference. But again, right now, there's no greater impetus to change than right now. I mean, it's sustainability. I mean, it's about sustainability.
So from a practical point of view, rather than doing it yourselves, would you not feel that acquiring companies that have done it is another route to that?
Oh, it's a great route.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely
partnering with startups,
Yeah.
acquiring them. And to Annie's comment, there's stuff that you can do from a collaboration perspective that can unleash tremendous value, especially when, we think about researcher as our North Star. The researcher doesn't want to deal with the silos of all the publishers out there. So what is it that we can do together that will make a tremendous difference, have impact?
I mean, we can look at pharma companies. So that's a lot of what they're doing today, right? I mean, is read the paper. And, they have trouble innovating. They're big, very, very big institutions with, certain ways of approaching things. And they've found themselves to be way less innovative. So they buy. That's what they do. And it's definitely happening in this industry. It's been happening for quite a while in this industry. So I think that's certainly a way in. Now, what do you do with it? How effectively can you integrate it? Are you buying it to take it out of the market? Are you buying it to, what are you doing with the asset? I think that's a whole nother panel, frankly. But that is very, very challenging. And there's a lot of waste in that process. I think everybody here knows that. And has lived it to some degree. So it is a very challenging approach. I think from the legacy perspective, just expanding on what you pointed out, Judy, the immense amount of subject matter expertise in those parts of all of our businesses is huge. And your customer wants to talk to somebody who they know knows what they're talking about, knows their area, knows the domain, and all of that. So I think that's an extremely important aspect, is to retain that team and try to innovate on that legacy business, not just milk it, you have to try to build on that. And I think to some degree that is letting your team experiment with the assets in your legacy business. So if you put it on a platform, you break it down, you let your team go out and say, I want to pick these 3 things and go out and try something new with those, using those pieces on the legacy business. That's, I think, why a product platform is really the way to go. We've invested a ton in that. I think that's a good way to go to try to get some more value out of your legacy business.
Do you think it's easier for small startups to innovate than the sort of companies that we have in our industry?
Well, that depends on how you organize for innovation. So, and I would consider it a mistake to just delegate radical or architectural innovation to startups. So, in the sense of saying, well, if we don't really want to do it ourselves, so let's just buy a startup. I don't think this is what you should do, because we should bear in mind that although we had the 4 types of innovation this morning, this is actually a continuum. So every time you're looking at a specific innovation opportunity, it will have different aspects. So I think you should work on this continuum also in your own organization. And I can give the example from Karger. We have an arm of the company that is called Karger Labs, and that's subject area development. And this is what you would call the legacy business. People just looking at content, at subject areas, and how to find new ways of creating content and distributing content and developing content. We have a team called Strategy, Innovation and Ventures that is more geared towards radical and architectural innovation, and that also manages the relationships with strategic partners and companies that we look into or that are partnering with us. So we have a process in place that allows us to look at a substantial number of opportunities for strategic partnerships every month. And I think that's the right way of doing it, because they're all Karger Labs, but they have different foci as well. And there are also strategic competence centers for education and learning, for example, that sit somewhere in between. And I think it's the combination of these approaches and the toolbox together with what you can get in from outside that will really increase your capability to innovate.
And I think, Michael, a lot of, when you think about successful innovation in a company, it can't be just a group, your labs group or your innovation group. It needs to become part of your culture and your mindset. And you've got to have the reward system and infrastructure that supports it. And I think that's a big part of the opportunity for all of us. It's got to change the mindset, and then that it's okay to fail, but fail fast, be agile, move on, and that type of behavior gets rewarded. To encourage people to think out of the box, be bold, have these big, bold, audacious ideas, and then go for them. But I think from an executive level, you have got to create an environment that supports that and rewards it.
Yeah, I'll take this opportunity to double down, Judy, on what you're saying, because I really believe so much of this is around culture. And if you have a culture, and it sounds like, some great examples here around companies innovating with the right kind of culture. For some cultures, innovation may mean just continuous improvement and giving people kind of, white belts and doing some process, improvement stuff. And I know that, it felt that way to me when I first joined TNF, that was a big leap for us. We've really progressed over the last 2 years, and I feel like the culture is starting to sort of embrace greater ambitions. But, you can only go as fast as the culture will allow you to do. So I think one of the key things we have to do as leaders is really work and understand what is the capacity, the innovative capacity of the culture, and really make sure to put a lot of time and energy in that. And startups can be a great bridge when you really don't have a culture that yet supports the kind of progressive mindset that you have to get there. So very, very much agree with that.
It's been very interesting to hear what you've said about innovation not necessarily being about technology. So that I find that quite an interesting viewpoint, because I think there is a bit of a tendency in the outside world to see the word innovation and think that must have to do with technology. So let's move on a little bit to technology innovations. What do you think are going to be the most important technologies that are going to be crucial for our industry in the years to come?
Well, can I answer? Or?
Sure.
I think it's AI and machine learning. I mean, that's where it's at. So it certainly isn't. Innovation is not exclusively technology, but it certainly involves it, right? And so people, process, product, technology. As far as the AI and machine learning bit goes, this stuff isn't new. It's been around for a while, and a lot of terms get tossed around. And I certainly am not saying this from on the mount here, as the subject matter expert on this. But a lot of things are getting, oh, we're doing this with AI, we're doing this with, and you're sort of thinking that I'm not sure that is AI, but eventually we're going to find our way there. And that's certainly already showing up in the industry today. So I think that's a very important piece. And one other piece I think that you wanted to maybe touch on was blockchain, which a lot of people are talking about. And the whole distributed ledger concept, I think, is very important and one we need to be looking at. There are a lot of experiments. I'm actually running a conference where we have a big focus on blockchain. Last year did one on this. There are some really fantastic experiments from Australia where there's a blockchain project being funded by the government or partially funded by the government, which is helping to protect the rights of Aboriginal artists. There are experiments in Canada. There are certainly experiments all over the U.S., experiments with author disambiguation, author rights, that sort of thing. In this space, of course, I'm not talking about cryptocurrency here, in the space that's related to us. I think that's it's very important to follow. I don't think it's really quite there yet. So it's something that we're watching, but we are actually not engaged in that. Whereas in AI and machine learning, we are definitely working on that. We're engaged in closely watching it, integrating it into our offerings as appropriate and where appropriate. But the market, I think, is going to keep moving on this arc, and it'll sort of maybe start and stop a couple of more times in this regard, while everybody kind of gets their house in order. And the first thing I think everybody's focused on right now, we can all talk about machine learning, we can all talk about if our data is a mess, You know, folks, you got to, fix the hygiene stuff first, right? So we've got to deal with the data issues. We have to deal with the semantic enrichment. We have to deal with the vocabularies. And those things sound easy, and we have a lot of subject matter expertise in these legacy businesses, but creating those ontologies within our own houses, we think we can do it. It's not all so easy. And so, is it easier for the startups to innovate? Well, it's easier for them to focus because they're single-purpose organizations in a lot of cases. So all their resources, all their executive attention, all of their energy poured into solving one problem. And maybe they only get it to here, and they don't have the great content that you have, so they can't really break that barrier, but they can, there's one of them here, one of them here, one of them here. You look down, there's 1,000. Then there's 10,000. There's a lot of people out there that are smart enough to get it to there, get the technology to there and focus on that one problem, and you can't buy them all. So, we need to find ways to innovate like that inside our companies. And if we're doing that with the kind of data that we're dealing with in this industry right now, when clients are begging for better data, excuse my Boston accent, that's where we have to start, is with the data, in my opinion. Don't want to sound too preachy. Sorry.
Yeah, I think artificial intelligence is really the crucial technology, and we cannot discuss the 23 flavors and which of the flavors have been around for 50 years or which haven't. But I think AI and machine learning are really an important topic, and we all know the obvious reasons. It's that it revolutionizes how you can slice and dice content and recombine it into bespoke offerings, catering to the very specific information needs of your clients, and how it can streamline and dramatically increase the efficiency of workflows. But there's another thing. I think Karger is a publisher in the health sciences, and our clients, they're using this all the time. Sam Herbert said this morning there are algorithms that will recognize cancer. There is a heated debate going on in the medical field whether actually AI is going to replace doctors or whether it will just support doctors. So AI and machine learning, at least in our fields of expertise, are rapidly becoming commonplace. So it's not a question whether when they have an information need, whether we choose to use AI or whether we think that AI is the technology to go with. It's just a basic expectation, and this will continue to evolve, I think. So.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree. I agree 1,000% on the AI, applications. I think where we're seeing opportunity in several areas, to try not to overlap too much with what's already been said. One is in really improving the ability to curate content, also in the ability to find the experts that really need to peer review to get the best outcome. So a lot of work early on in sort of the acquisition and synthesis of knowledge. But also on the back end, once you have these nuggets of wisdom, there's a real opportunity that I think is unprecedented. We've sort of traditionally in our businesses have sort of sent all this stuff to the library, and wait for people to sort of come in and consume it there. But we should set our ambitions higher about really getting this information right to the point. And if you think about healthcare, the human brain can't absorb the amount of innovation that's going on in those fields. And, the point of care solution, sometimes you're relying on whatever they learned in medical school, decades before, when so much innovation has gone on. So it's really also looking at some of these technologies to really get the critical information to the people who need it exactly at the moment in which they need it. So it's both on the early knowledge origination side, but also very much on the dissemination and even the amplification side, and also on the verification itself of how to really substantiate those assertions. So very, very exciting time, I think, to be involved in all of this, innovation.
Yeah, I have to agree 1,000% here as well. And maybe just a point to add to that, more than ever before, our offerings are becoming part of our clients' actual workflows in their day-to-day life. So that they will not go to the library over lunch and sit down and read an article. They will be at bedside, they will be at the bench, and then they have this question or this problem, and they need the answer right away.
Yeah.
And they're using modern technology readily, and AI is commonplace for them, and we have to adapt to this in our offerings as well.
I wonder, in 20 years, or whatever, some time horizon, are they going to read the article, or are they going to interrogate your systems, Daniel and other colleagues, the systems that you're going to create in the future, interrogate those systems for answers, right? And look for the answers, because there's already more information than anyone can read. So what happens with that human readable use case? Are we really looking at machine consumption of, I don't think we're looking at machines outplacing people, but I hear the heated debate, and I'm certainly no expert on that. I think it's supporting people in the jobs and changing the landscape of what the employment is. But the machine as a tool to help in posing the question, perhaps answering the question, predicting what the question could be, that sort of thing. I think that certainly in the clinical setting that you're giving the example of, I think is extremely relevant today. It's already happening. And I think the only thing is that it will get better. It will get better as, technology advances, the data is improved, the content is more readily available, the clinician is more adept at using the tools, on site, with the patient, that sort of thing. Just to use that example, but there's many other examples on the bench, et cetera. So.
And content consumption by machines just adds another layer of complexity, because the machine that will consume your content or whatever you're sending its way will also solve a need of a human user sooner or later, right? There may be many stages, but if both of the machine components use modern technologies, then this can lead to tricky situations. So you have to understand the need of the end user, but also how the machines in between work, and that will be a huge challenge for us, I guess.
And governance on that.
And governance.
Governance is a huge question then, back to the ethics piece.
Given that we're all in the business of distributing knowledge, disseminating knowledge, my hope is that there's something downloadable that you could use at night and get
a plug.
That to me would be the best future innovation. Yeah, anyway.
I'd be signing up. I'd be an early adopter too.
Well, it was interesting earlier that Annie talked about a collaborative corpus with Judy. I'm interested in the wider dynamic of that, because it does seem to me that competition law and other restraints have often made that type of sectoral innovation difficult to do. Do you have any thoughts about how we could move that forward? I mean,
Judy.
It's going to be about standards and processes,
Yeah.
but it's also going to be about what's legal.
Yeah, I mean, obviously legalities, and I don't mean to make a funny face at legalities, because they really are important, and we don't do anything without an attorney in the room. Yeah, but there's one giant human corpus, right? And if we're trying to get at some of these problems, they're very siloed. And I don't think any one of us, because that's not the nature of the way the intake works. The way the intake works is that we all partner with a bunch of really brilliant minds, and we all source and cultivate and curate a lot of this knowledge. But then it ends up sitting under these umbrellas that really are sort of randomly fragmented, right? But if you actually wanted to try and apply some of this knowledge, then it stands to reason that some of it is going to be sitting sort of across those dimensions. So we certainly need to act responsibly, pro-competitively, but it gets back to what problems are we trying to solve? And if we're really trying to solve some of the most advanced problems in our ecosystem right now, it's very unlikely that the sort of synthesis of all the information that's needed, sorry, that killed me, Okay. That the synthesis of all the information that's needed is just happens to randomly be under my tent or under Judy's tent or under Kumsal's tent or whatnot. So I think there are pro-competitive ways in which we can be looking to responsibly put forward opportunities. So for example, we know that the way in which we're disseminating information today isn't as rapidly absorbed by learners, right? Because, I mean, how many of you have kids, right? How many of them are sitting down with these sort of sequential textbooks and reading kind of cover to cover? They're on YouTube, they're consuming knowledge in new ways. So it may very well be that in order to address that problem of rapid learning, that we really need to apply this knowledge in some very new and foundationally different ways. And that, again, may mean grabbing, content by domain and not by publisher, and not by country, and not by business model, but really looking across a very, very different composite. We've got to be open to that. To me, that's innovation. And yes, we have to do it very responsibly. We have to do it very effectively. It has to provide real value. It has to solve a problem. But if it meets those criteria, then we should be able to come up with something that has a fair value in the market, that responsibly rewards for the creation of that value, and doesn't lock anybody else out of the opportunity. I believe that those opportunities are out there, but we have to be open to them.
And I'll just add one thing, there are examples, Michael, outside of our industry where there's collaboration across, and again, I come from telecom industry. You had to do that because you had to have open standards and open data. Could you imagine if the telecom and the internet didn't connect? You'd be in all these silos. So when you think about our world and going more towards open research, open data, open standards, open peer recognition, open rewards, that stuff we're all going to have to naturally work together. And you could work together in a collaborative way that stays within antitrust, anti-competitive rules, and do it on behalf of the customers we serve. And I always say the researcher. So,
I agree.
I'm interested, Daniel, how you feel about this, because clearly there's an interest in people with large corpuses to get together. But
it's not about the size of the corpus. Sorry, it's not about the size of the corpus. It really isn't. It's about what's the what problem is trying to be solved in a particular. I think it's more by domain, and actually, I think it has nothing to do with size.
No, it doesn't.
I don't think have to do with size, but this doesn't.
I'm happy Annie gave you her opinion.
Yes. On size, no. No. So I think I was a bit puzzled by the way the conversation went, because there have been tools and platform and databases to look underneath the tents forever, right? So it's just a matter of discussing what kind of access to your corpuses is required by new players, which can include us, to do some new magic in finding advanced ways of slicing and dicing and curating content. So Karger bought a major stake in a company called Quirtle at the beginning of this year. They are an AI-based biomedical discovery tool. That's their main product. It's called QInsight. And I would love to talk to you about getting the full Wiley corpus in there to do some magic. But would you be open to that?
I'm wide open.
You don't have to reply
innovation.
here.
No,
We can
wide
discuss
open.
it. But I think that it's. I think we need to agree that the next step in doing magic with the content corpuses we have is having full access to the full text of the corpuses and any semantic enrichment that you have done in-house, right? And that is not the case now. So should we work towards that? And who could be potential partners? Should it be other commercial entities? Should it be STM driving it? But I think that's the next step we need to take.
Who says it has to be the entire corpus? Because actually, some of these problems are very specific to a very specific domain. I wouldn't mind starting out, I'm just picking just mechanical engineering. Let's solve a problem, right? This isn't about trying to create, some uber, entity that has all the knowledge in the world, and then we have like a whole new thing that costs a lot of money to keep up that doesn't do anything, Let's just be practical. Let's be pragmatic. Let's be innovative, around very specific problems. But to answer your question just openly, yes, we would be very open to exploring these things. If we don't really start stepping out from these boundaries of these shackles that we have, we're not going to actually do the things that I think our communities need from this knowledge. And then we're not responsible parties who are really advancing. So let's not be afraid to have these exploratory discussions and see where they go, and really embrace the things that make the most sense.
That's great to hear.
I mean, I think if we're talking about, I'm at this moment, I'm going to be really honest, I'm not really sure what we're talking about. But if we're talking about,
I think we all agree with you.
If we're talking about not competing on content or the value of content and competing on the services or the services layer on top of content, you're like, wow, I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I don't know if everyone's ready for that, but I think the customer's ready for it. So that's one thing I would comment on. And another thing I would, because I'm not really in a place to talk about, I have no corpus to talk about here. But the other, I'm in a different position. The other thing that I would just think about from the pro-competitive piece you were talking about is regulation. So there's lots of governments, there's lots of taxes, there's lots of taxpayers. And, I'm sure they all, we can go over to the United Nations and, the Group Bs and everybody else, they want, all the science to be available for everybody all the time. And, because we have to cure disease, address climate change, grow disease-free crops and all of these challenges that the world faces. So I think we have to think about that and think about the regulatory position that the industry and all of the players here are in, et cetera, and what the perspectives of some of these other entities are. So I think the innovation in terms of breaking the barriers down and taking the shackles off, finding new ways to address problems, I think that's great. I wonder if we can, I think we will focus on things like the mechanical engineering example, but is that really enough? Or is that sort of a finger in the dike or whatever, I don't know, good metaphor for that. Is that sort of, when we're dealing with one thing when there's just this huge waterfall? I'm not sure, but I'm not sure on the, if we're really ready for that kind of collaboration on the content. It would be amazing if we were.
I don't know if we're necessarily talking about collaboration on content. We're talking about collaboration on standards. And to kind of pick up on your regulation comment, to me, regulation and innovation are polar opposites. I've never seen innovation exist in a regulated industry. And so I think that's...
Yeah. I mean, this is a regulated industry, right? And so your telecom example, when you talked about the open standards and stuff, I was thinking about my own kind of experience with telecom. I was thinking, it doesn't feel so open to me. So,
it changed. It went from completely regulated to competitive industry, and that's when innovation started coming in terms of broadband, in terms of video.
Yep.
When it was regulated, nothing happened. Think of the airlines when they were regulated.
Right. So, and now, it depends on where you live. Now we're back to potentially throttling the consumer if we want to watch, things on the internet versus our cable. That sort of thing depends on what country you live in. I'm sure I live in the U.S., so as you can tell. It is what it is. I think it ebbs and flows. So I think, certainly we are operating in a regulated industry. Certainly governments have a huge interest in science. It's one of the top things we're spending money on. And so, defense, education, healthcare. So, I think enough said on that. I think the point made. It's regulated, and so to that degree, I think the innovation.
I still disagree on that we're regulated. We're not regulated,
okay.
and we've got to protect against that happening.
Then we don't want to invite it.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, correct.
To pick you up on that, Judy,
Yeah.
I regularly talk to people in the European Commission whose sole interest is in regulating
Correct.
our industry, and I constantly make the point that you've just made,
Yeah.
that if you want innovation, then you don't have rules for innovation. That's a complete anathema. We probably need to sort of bring this to a close. I was struck in the recent exchange that there's possibly a new role for SDM going forward. And I don't know whether my successor's in the audience or not, but it seems to me that perhaps we could be a dating agency for you companies to come together and have these discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, can you give a big round of applause for the panel?
I thought you guys were going to come.